Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Protests continue in Venezuela as both President Nicolas Maduro and the US-backed opposition leader Juan Guaido call on their respective supporters to mobilize in the streets. Today, we discuss the ongoing political instability in the country.
I am David Smolansky, mayor in exile from Venezuela, and you are in the stream.
On Wednesday, Guaido continued to encourage Venezuelans to take to the streets and the armed forces to join his Operation Freedom. His loyalists are hoping to tip the balance after an unsuccessful attempt to spark a military uprising the day before. President Maduro declared that those involved in the alleged coup attempt would not go unpunished. In a video posted to Twitter on Tuesday, Guaido, in the presence of several dozen soldiers, said that the final phase of his campaign to remove President Maduro from office had begun. Government officials asserted that the army had remained loyal, calling troops alongside Guaido traitorous. Security forces clashed with anti-Maduro demonstrators in Caracas, with the Reuters news agency reporting that a National Guard armored car struck protesters who threw stones at the vehicle. Maduro responded to the situation in a tweet, calling for maximum popular mobilization to assure the victory of peace. Joining us now to help break down the latest news in Caracas, Lucas Kerner is a political analyst and the editor of the news site Venezuela Analysis. In Buenos Aires, Argentina, Daniel Schweimer is a correspondent for Al Jazeera English. And on the set in Washington, D.C., Fabiola Rondon Delgado is a human rights attorney. Hello, everybody. It's good to have you here. Daniel, you've been standing up all day and all day yesterday, reporting for Al Jazeera, final phase of Guaido's push. Where are we now? What really happened?
Well, Juan Guaido had done a tour of Venezuela, talking to the military, talking to people to try to gauge the feeling, whether there was an appetite for what he called this final phase in the push to get rid of President Nicolas Maduro. And he obviously decided very early on Tuesday morning, in a video that he posted out before the sun had come up outside the La Carlota Air Base in Caracas, this was the moment. He gambled, it was a huge gamble, and asking the military to leave, put aside their loyalty to Nicolas Maduro and join him. Some did, but not enough, it seems. And it looks at this stage, a day later, his gamble has failed.
I'm just looking, Fabiola, at some of the protests that Juan Guaido, he's all over social right now. Yes. I don't know if he's posting or his team are posting, but I'm just looking at these pictures. People are on the streets, or he's taking pictures of people on the streets. Yeah. It's saying that people are still protesting. But you have a hotline to what is going on in terms of your family, your relatives who are there. Yes. And you got a message from your mum, and mums are very reliable, and your mum told you what?
My mom woke me up at 6:30 in the morning, saying, whatever you read on the news, I'm okay, I'm alive, I'm okay.
Right.
So that freaked me out a little bit. Immediately, I saw the news about not an uprising. I feel like sometimes the media takes like it was a military uprising, but the reality is that Guaido is the president interim of Venezuela, so he is the commander-in-chief of the National Army. So it's not an uprising of the army, it's a constitutional favor that they're doing. It's a final responsibility that they're doing to the Constitution and the people of Venezuela.
Lucas's eyebrows are very high right now. I'm not too sure he's got the same take as you. Lucas, go ahead.
It is a small problem that Guaido cited Article 233 of the Constitution to swear himself in, but there was no vacuum of power. And Nicolas Maduro was elected on May 20th, with 6.1 million votes, 30% of the total electorate amount, around the same proportion as Barack Obama was elected with in 2008. Moreover, if he was the interim president, he would have to convoke new elections within 30 days, which he did not do, leading to Elliot Abrams, the U.S. envoy to Venezuela's very humiliating press conference, where he said effectively that Juan Guaido is the interim president of an interim that hasn't begun yet. So it's really the legal grounding is very unclear, and the opposition is continuing with kind of provocations in an effort to justify U.S. military intervention, which they have repeatedly called for, in violation, of course, of international norms.
Many things. Military intervention by America is the last thing on my list. Let's start with the legal background. It's not cloudy. The Constitution states it very clearly that when there is a vacuum, the President of Congress becomes interim president. Nicolas Maduro pushed an election very early. The elections in Venezuela legally are held in December, and he pushed that election of 2017, December to May, because he knew he was losing popularity. So that election has been declared fraudulent by the Congress, by many countries around the world, over 50 countries around the world. People in Venezuela didn't even want to vote. They were very divided whether should we vote or should we not, because it is outside of the legal parameters where elections should happen. So it was a fraudulent election.
But this is problematic, Lucas and Fabiola, because there will be some parties in Venezuela, and I'm talking about people, who will be very supportive of President Maduro. There will be some parties who will be incredibly supportive of Juan Guaido. And there is this issue. I want to show you some of the live feed that I know is happening right now as we go to Caracas. And people are on the streets. They are not happy because you have a president who said, I am president, and you have the current president as well. I'm just looking here also about what happens when you have people on the streets like you see them right now, because the internet goes away. Connectivity goes away. Lucas, can you explain what you don't have right now when people are protesting?
I mean, indeed, I think it's important to remember that, in fact, in Venezuela, just to respond very quickly to Fabiola, that Venezuela's May 20 elections had an opposition candidate, Henry Falcón, won over 2 million votes. You had 46%
Lucas,
turnout,
I understand your position. We are moving on that because we could spend 25 minutes talking about the position of Guaido and the position of Maduro. So when people are on the streets like this right now, what do you lose as a resident in any area where people are protesting? Internet, for instance, is not there, correct?
No, in fact, Venezuela has one of the highest coverage in terms of both cell phones and cellular data plans. So there actually is a lot. Most people do have access to social media, and likewise, most of the private television media is pro-opposition. For example, Venevision, for example, Televen, Global Vision is more neutral. But the opposition does have, I would say, an advantage in both social media, televised media, and they also have important newspaper presence. So there is not, a blackout as being maintained. Moreover, the international media is overwhelmingly biased, in support of the U.S.'s regime change program in Venezuela. As a recent article by FAIR reported, there are 0 pundits, in the U.S. mainstream media who are openly against the U.S. coup in Venezuela.
Lucas, let me share this with you, and Fabiola, then you can pick up. Sure. This is Louisa Kislinger on Twitter. She talks about the reason for blocking access to the internet is that social media is the only way that most people in Venezuela can access information. You block the internet, then they don't get the information. Local TV channels and most radio stations are fiercely watched by the regime to keep them from reporting what is going on. That is a different perspective from the one that Lucas shared with us. And you say what?
Absolutely. Since 2001, with the closing of RCTV, the oldest news network in Venezuela, that led to a whole, 2 decades of closing TV networks, radio stations. There is not one radio or TV station in the country that is not managed by the government. Which is why all of the information that people deal is via social media, via Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp is how we communicate, because every time you turn on the TV, it's like there's 2 parallel Venezuelas. We see novelas, we see old Chavez's discourses, we see everything is okay. But in the meantime, you open the window. You don't even have to open the window. You can hear it. You see the people are in the street, and it's not being reported, which is why we have international media reporting. And the BBC, CNN has been kicked out. CNN en Español has been kicked out in 2015, I believe, out of the roster. So even if you have cable, Venezuelan people are not allowed to watch international TV.
Daniel, I want to play this to you because you can hear the 2 sides here. There are more than 2 sides, but you can hear Lucas and Fabiola, they are not on the same page. And it almost seems like everyone in Venezuela is divided. Where are they behind Maduro or are they behind Guaido? This is a Melanio Escobar. He is a journalist. Have a listen to how he explains what is going on right now, Daniel, and then you can pick up off the back of it.
One of the things that we need to think about is that Juan Guaido is the legitimate president of Venezuela, and he's being backed up by Venezuelan people. The call for demonstrations, the call for protests is a legitimate way to claim power against Maduro's regime. Either way, this is the end, either for Maduro's regime or for the movement of civil society of Venezuela to gain freedom to our country.
It's another point of view. I mean, it's an increasingly polarized society. We hear increasingly polarized points of view. And you can have arguments about whether one side or the other is respecting the Constitution or not. But what we've seen are more demonstrations. I mean, I was there in Venezuela in 2014. There were demonstrations on the streets by both sides, pro and anti-government. Something like 80 or 90 people were killed, again, on both sides. Some of the members of the security forces were also killed. It was a very tense situation. And then it died down. So what seems to happen is every now and then these demonstrations flare up, but it really does seem to be just representative of what is a polarized society, getting even more polarized, I must say, as the situation intensifies and as we have the international situation now with Russia, China, Turkey supporting Maduro, the United States, Brazil, and Colombia and others supporting Juan Guaido. So again, I don't really know. Whoever you listen to, you have to be very, very careful. You identify almost immediately who is on what side, trying to pick your way through that and establish some kind of balance view of what's going on is the challenge we all face.
Let me share with you the verified Twitter account of Nicolas Maduro. I'm using the translation from Twitter into English for you. I thank the Venezuelan people for their courage and conscience in the face of this attempted coup d'etat. They have shown that a mobilized people is a guarantee of tranquility for the homeland. Venezuela is territory of peace and independence. Lucas, how has the President Maduro, handled this situation, do you think?
I want to correct one thing very quickly, that RCTV was closed in 2000, was not closed, it had its license revoked in 2007, not 2001, and it actually played a key role in the 2002 coup that was sponsored by Elliot Abrams at the time. But in terms of your question, that Maduro faces a very difficult dilemma, that if he chooses to arrest someone who clearly has violated numerous Venezuelan laws and is attempting a coup against him, is openly calling on the armed forces to insurrection and calling for international invasion repeatedly, that he's unable to arrest and bring him to justice, because if he does so, he crosses what the Trump administration has delineated as a red line, in which it will perhaps invade the country or bomb the country, as Mike Pompeo was just threatening. So it's a very dangerous situation where the United States is, it's also important to recognize that Leopoldo Lopez, who was just freed yesterday from his condition of house arrest, he himself played a key role in the 2002 coup and kidnapping the justice minister at the time. So these are characters who have a long history. This is the sixth time that opposition has attempted to oust the Venezuelan government.
Here on Twitter is TJ63 Fabiola. TJ says that the whole point of the protest is to put pressure on President Nicolas Maduro to resign from office. How is that working out from your perspective?
To me, it's always a very interesting wording, because for him to resign, that means that he is president and he isn't legally. What we're asking is for him to leave, for him to stop usurping the position. We have a president, is Juan Guaido. He's interim president. He's going to call for elections, but it's a process that needs to start with the cease of usurpation, then creating a government of transition, and finally calling for free elections.
Daniel, it's really fascinating watching how President Maduro is conducting himself. I was just looking at his Twitter feed. He hasn't tweeted anything for hours, whereas Guaido is tweeting every few minutes and trying to rally the people. How do you contrast those two leaders about how they are handling this situation? Maduro feels like he's very confident right now.
Well, he thinks he's won. I mean, that's the impression he's put forward. He gave his press conference surrounded by the military high command late last night. And so he's basically sitting back waiting for Guaido to make the next move. He doesn't have to speak just yet. I'm sure he will at some stage. But I just found it interesting listening to Fabiola and Lucas, even the use of the word coup d'etat or uprising. So even the language that people on both sides use will indicate almost immediately which side of the debate, which side of the debate they're on. So again, we even face the dilemma, the polarization of Venezuelan society in the debate in that way, in the language chosen to describe what's going on.
And may I say one thing? Let's say Nicolas Maduro on national TV has had some Freudian slip and said that Guaido was interim president. So he himself has accepted that Guaido is interim president. Why is the rest of the country not?
Let's have a listen to Nicolas Maduro. This was his response to a day of protests. So this was just a few hours ago. Have a listen, have a look.
With the truth as a sword, as a shield, we face so many attacks and so many lies. And thanks to the truth, we have emerged victorious in every situation. And we will continue to emerge victorious in any difficulty that we will face from now on, in the upcoming months and years. I have no doubt about it.
Laura Vidal on Twitter here is the editor of Global Voices, and she's been watching, and her journalists have been following very keenly what is happening in Venezuela. Laura reminds us it's important to remember that Venezuela's crisis is affecting the continent. It's not just the US, it's also Venezuela's neighbouring countries, mainly Colombia, receiving waves of people suffering from hunger, trauma, diseases that can affect the health status of the region. Daniel, can you pick up on that, expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, this is a story we've covered in some depth. I mean, not just Colombia. Colombia has borne the brunt of many of the migrants. Brazil, tens of thousands of people. We've been to some of the most remote towns in Bolivia, for instance, and found Venezuelan migrants there. Here in Buenos Aires, there are large presence as well, very well integrated into the society. But I think that is a reason why countries in Latin America are very keen to see an end to this crisis as soon as possible, for the sake of Venezuela, of course, but mostly because they fear something like 4 million Venezuelans, an estimate, have left the country already. If things get much worse, if this erupts into a full civil war, then people are very, very frightened about what will happen if there are tens of thousands, millions more flooding across the borders. The social structures are simply not good enough to cope in some of these countries. We saw that just over the border in Brazil, in northern Brazil. When the initial wave of migrants came over, they were very well accepted, they integrated into society, local people were helping them a great deal. 2 or 3 years later, that mood had turned because there were so many Venezuelans coming over, and they were seen as a drain on resources, and there was a violent reaction in some of the migrant camps. So yeah, it is a big worry around the rest of the region.
It's really important to talk about the military in this current situation in Venezuela right now. Niyamogo Godney mentions this in a tweet to us. Military divisions in Venezuela, not healthy for Maduro, as those are early signs of the fall of his regime. But maybe that was Tuesday, perhaps not on Wednesday, Lucas. What's the military doing?
Indeed, I mean, we have yet to see any ranking military official, defect and support the opposition. Certainly, there seems to be fractures in the intelligence apparatus, which historically has been staffed by many more right-wing elements. But within the military, it seems solidly behind Maduro. And I think it's also important regarding migration. I want to comment very quickly that one of the key driving factors behind migration in the region is U.S. sanctions, which, according to a recent report by economists Mike Weisbrot and Jeffrey Sachs, has already killed 40,000 people in Venezuela, and according to Francisco Rodriguez, an opposition economist, it's going to cause Venezuela's economy to contract by 37% in 2019, destroying over a third of the economy. And considering that over half of the economy has been destroyed in the last 5 years, with sanctions playing an important role indeed in that as well. So it's important to recognize the United States is exacerbating this crisis and itself causing the migration, which is using the right-wing United States using to justify its further anti-immigrant policies.
Well, I wanted to mention about the sanctions. The sanctions have been very specific, especially towards people in high rankings of the government who are infiltrated in narco trafficking to North America. The 2 nephews of President, let's call him Nicolas Maduro, are currently in prison in New York because they smuggled 1 ton of cocaine through Haiti in an official airplane, and they were intercepted by American officials and Venezuelan officials as well that have deflected the government and are requesting asylum and refuge in the United States. So to talk about sanctions being the reason behind immigration started years ago. It's been 2 decades of mismanagement, of corruption, and the sanctions are just like a cherry on top, but the money has never really arrived to the people. It's been, removal of visas, blockades to, specific power movers, not really the Venezuelan people.
Daniel, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I think it also has to be said that even before Hugo Chavez came to power, there were massive divisions in Venezuelan society. There was massive insecurity or massive inequality in the distribution of wealth. And while some people were very, very wealthy, and I was lucky enough to go to Venezuela in the early 1990s, before Hugo Chavez came to power. And there was massive inequality and a great deal of resentment and a great deal of anger. And that is one of the reasons why Hugo Chavez did come to power, was popularly supported. And the legacy of that, I think, is still remembered. I mean, it has to be said by any sensible measure, the Venezuelan economy at the moment is an absolute disaster. Inflation is out of control, massive shortages of almost everything. And Nicolas Maduro obviously must take a great deal of blame for that. But people still do remember how things were. Just because they dislike Nicolas Maduro, and many do, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to support Juan Guaido and the people who surround him, because they remember what life was like before Hugo Chavez came to power.
Let me remind you that the pictures that you are watching, we're in Caracas right now. They're coming through us live to Al Jazeera. And who you are seeing on the streets are the supporters of Juan Guaido. I know, Fabiola and Daniel, you were talking about sanctions. Also, Gabriel Hetland, assistant professor of University at Albany, was trying to think, how do we get out of this situation? He also mentioned sanctions. Have a listen.
So I think it's absolutely crucial for the international community to call for negotiations, to call for a complete cessation of these illegal and incredibly damaging sanctions within Venezuela, to call for a complete end to U.S. threats of war on moral grounds and also on effective grounds. These are just an obstacle to the actual path of peace, and they've utterly failed to achieve any of their stated objectives so far, and they've really hardened the lines within Venezuela. So moving towards a more peaceful solution, I think, is absolutely critical, and I think that's where energy of the international community, including people reporting on Venezuela, should be.
Let's look at some of the reporting from Venezuela from some of the big U.S. newspapers. Let's look at the New York Times. Pompeo, Secretary of State for the United States, accuses Cuba and Russia of propping up Venezuelan ruler. And then we go across to Reuters. Russia denies the U.S. claim it told Venezuela's Maduro not to flee. Who to be believed? What do you understand is really happening regarding international players, Fabiola?
Yes,
because you are a Guaido supporter, obviously.
Yes, and not just of Guaido for the sake of Guaido. I'm trying to get my country back on track. The fact is that at 6:30 a.m., Guaido makes an announcement. He's backed by some military players, and at 7:30 a.m., a Russian airplane arrives from Moscow to Caracas, a bombardier, I can't remember the plate, the license plate, and that has been reported by Venezuelan reporter, independent reporter, I forgot his name, but he was also, he's in Madrid right now because he was persecuted politically. And you know, that happens. An hour later from Moscow, he arrives to Caracas, and then 2 hours later, that same airplane goes to the Dominican Republic.
Okay.
Gets to Punta Cana. So who to believe? I'm not sure. I'm not in the circles of intelligence.
Okay.
But
see, Ivy's watching you right now. She's watching our conversation here on the stream. Ivy says, and this is really pointed at you, Fabiola, Guaido is not the president. He is helping a foreign government invade. U.S. sanctions have killed an estimated 40,000 Venezuelans. And I'm the U.S., and in the U.S., the media is propaganda, so it's the same issue. Can we hear the black Venezuelans' point of view? We only have 3 people in this conversation, but many more people out there. So there's pushback about Guaido being the president. Sure. Let me just share this with you. This is from Dr. Bard, DDR. Daniel, I'm going to go back to you. We're just wrapping up. We've got 30 seconds left here. Eventually, the people of Venezuela will suffer from chaos and street fighting. People's health, lives, welfare must be the first line. Both sides don't pay attention to this matter. Daniel, closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, any right-thinking person has to agree with that. Venezuela is the focus of a much bigger battle, which involves the US and Russia and several other players, and the Venezuelan people at the heart of this big divide between Guaido supporters and Maduro supporters, inevitably are the ones that suffer.
Daniel Schweimer, Lucas Kerner, Fabiola Rondon Delgado, thank you so much sharing with us how divided people in Venezuela are. We will continue with this at aljazeera.com. Follow all the latest news there, and with the stream at AJ Stream. Thanks for watching. Thank you, guests. See you next time.